A lot of people, Rami, would argue that that's where a lot of the problems are coming, a lot of the exacerbation of the violence, both inside Syria, in Lebanon, and across the region, in many of the places you mentioned. I just want to draw your attention, because you brought up Saudi Arabia and the rivalry with Iran, at least the perceived threat. Nahar Net, obviously a media organization in Lebanon, tweeting Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif from Rome saying the bombings in Beirut are an alarm for all of us. We also have Sam Daghed saying Syria and Hezbollah officials are openly blaming Saudi Arabia and its intelligence chief, in particular Prince Bandar, for the attack on the Iranian embassy. What do you make of those two tweets, but especially those claims? We've seen now the Iranian ambassador blame Israel. We've seen Syria and Hezbollah officials openly suggest that Saudi Arabia and its intelligence chief was responsible. What are your thoughts?
You're cutting out a little bit, but from what I saw from the tweet and your comments, I'm not surprised at all. The Saudi-Iranian rivalry has been behind the scenes driving much of the political tension and the military violence all around the region. Syria is the point where it all came together, and with Hezbollah fighting against Salafi groups inside Lebanon, and now Hezbollah and Lebanese Salafis fighting each other inside Syria. Syria and Lebanon have become one military battleground, unfortunately, for both of those countries, and people are openly criticizing each other. There's no more playing games and being polite. People who are critical of Hezbollah attack the Iranians. People who are critical of the Salafis or some of the Sunni groups or some of the pro-Saudi groups will criticize the Saudi Arabians. So you need here a serious political process that has to tone down the Iranian-Saudi rivalries, because everybody in the region, including the Saudis, is now threatened by these kinds of suicide bombers. These people call them takfiris, Salafis, fundamentalist, militant terrorists who speak in the name of Islam but represent a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of Muslims. Hardly anybody follows these criminals, but they get the most publicity because of what they do. And these people now, these Salafi militant terrorists, are emerging in the thousands from Syria and from Iraq,
right.
Which we have to go back to George Bush and Condoleezza Rice, by the way, and Tony Blair, and ask them what they started in Iraq, which is now leading to tens of thousands of these people in Syria. They've linked up with people in Lebanon.
Of course.
They're exporting. So this is the real problem.
And Rami, I appreciate you bringing up that point, because the reality is, for as much as sectarian tensions in the region weren't created by the Iraqi invasion, the invasion of Iraq, it certainly exacerbated the situation, and anyone on the ground will tell you that. With that in mind, Riza, I have to ask you, if you look at some of the tweets, Kim Ghattas of the BBC saying the bombing of the Iranian embassy in Beirut comes 30 years after the bombing of the US and French embassies. The Syria conflict is like a continuation of the Lebanese civil war. We've heard from friends of mine, who I've been talking to in Beirut, a sense of shock and surprise at the brutality of this attack. In particular, the fact that it was suicide bombings. Of course, we're used to explosions in Lebanon, but suicide bombings in particular. What do you make of some of these allegations, as well as what Rami mentioned about the Saudi-Iranian rivalry?
I think Rami made some critical points that describe a long-standing conflict that has ebbed and flowed in this part of the world. What we've seen to date is a rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia that can be either competition, which doesn't have a negative connotation, or it can be confrontation, which is what we've largely seen over the past 8 years. And as a result of the Iranians seeking to take a different path in their foreign policy and national security and the way that it's operationalized, there's a bit of concern going on now. It's not a coincidence, in my view, because there's no such thing as a coincidence in politics that this bombing happened literally the day before negotiations between Iran and the P5+1 resume in Geneva. Foreign Minister Zarif is correct. Everybody needs to take a step back and realize that actions such as this put everybody at risk. And the multiplier effect that could build off of this, if political leaders aren't willing to take risks for peace, could become extremely dangerous and detrimental to everybody involved, including the United States.